Hello friends, and welcome to the channel. In this entry, we'll be taking a look at Smaug, the dragon from the Hobbit trilogy. As the secondary antagonist of the franchise, Smaug was a fire drake and the last of his kind in the Third Age. Given that dragons were creations of Morgoth, it should come as no surprise that Smaug represents pure evil and has no redeeming or sympathetic qualities. As Tolkien has expressed a disdain for allegories, it's unlikely that he wrote Smaug to represent anything. But in the context of the films, one can easily associate Smaug as a symbol of greed and pride. Smaug is introduced at the pinnacle of dwarven prosperity. The king's greed has become excessive to the point of mental illness, and Smaug represents the culmination of that moral decadence. Perhaps Smaug can be compared to the in Fellowship. Both creatures are forces of nature, sent when covetousness becomes out of control, like flies to a rubbish heap. With Moria, the dwarves also become too greedy in their mining exploits, which led to their downfall. Smaug has no inherent need or use for the gold, but there is a certain allure to the trinkets in the throne room. His invasion of the mountain was purely for selfish purposes in the form of stroking his ego. Gold was the prime currency of the time, and Erebor had now become the Fort Knox of Middle-earth. By invading the mountain and conquering it, Smaug was declaring himself to be the richest and most enviable being in Middle-earth. But perhaps at the surface level, Smaug is also drawn to gold for its inherent aesthetic value. When Thorin unveils the giant statue of Thror, Smaug appears to be stunned as he gazes on it, as if he was mesmerized by its shine and glimmer. Smaug clearly knows what he is doing and how it affects others. He demonstrates intelligent thought, as seen by his verbal banter with Bilbo. Although he knows full well that his invasion of the Dwarf Kingdom would cause countless dwarves to lose their home, he is selfish enough to not care. In Smaug's eyes, the gold belongs to him simply by virtue of his might. While he cannot use the mountain of gold in an economic sense, it serves as external validation of his dominance. This is seen at the end of the second film, where he proudly declares to Thorin that he is the king under the mountain. Smaug takes great pride in the fact that he is at the top of the food chain, that he is virtually untouchable and can do whatever he wants. To quote him in his boasting to Bilbo, he says, "I kill where I wish, when I wish," before proceeding to illustrate how his physical attributes can be weaponized. Being a carnivore, it's reasonable that Smaug would have to kill to survive. But in light of the previous statement, it suggests that Smaug kills simply for his own pleasure. The pinnacle of Smaug's boasting, however, is not verbal, but is seen when he decides to sleep for 60 years after his invasion of Erebor. In effect, it's a declaration of his overconfidence, in which he subtly tells everyone that he isn't afraid of any retaliation. Despite having more gold than he could ever need, Smaug remains fiercely possessive, as seen when he tells Bilbo that he will not even part with a single coin, not one piece. Interestingly, Thorin would later use that same phrase with Bilbo about not parting with a single coin to the folks of Lake Town, a sign of the supposed dragon sickness that has consumed him. It would seem that there is somewhat of a chicken and egg dilemma here. It was established at the start that Smaug was initially drawn by Thror's pre-existing greed, but it seems that now he is the source of the corruption in the gold. Perhaps Smaug's presence carried with it such evil that it caused Thorin to succumb to his generational greed, even though he vowed not to repeat the mistake of his grandfather. Smaug labels Thorin a usurper, which is ironic since it was he who took the gold by force. This ties in with the previously mentioned fact that Smaug believes he deserves the gold since he was able to displace the dwarves by sheer force. Smaug's ego is also seen by his need to live up to his reputation. When Bilbo first meets him and comes up with filler to keep him talking, he brings up the inquiry as to whether Smaug really lived up to his reputation. Without hesitation, Smaug shows Bilbo the full size of his stature to prove that he is the terror that everyone quivers at. But while Smaug is egotistical, he is smart enough to detect insincere flattery, which he calls Bilbo out for. Smaug's evil isn't just limited to his outward actions, but is also seen in his words as well. He tries to sow discord by telling Bilbo that he has been used by Thorin and abandoned by him. When Bilbo is within reach of the Arkenstone, Smaug reveals a sadistic side when he mentions that he's tempted to let Oakenshield have it, just to see him suffer and drive him mad. This sinister side is also seen later when he expresses pleasure in attacking the townsfolk of Lake Town, after hearing of Bilbo's concern for them. During the attack, when Smaug is about to finish off Bard and his son, he deliberately takes a pause to gloat over his position and taunt Bard before his death. He could have just ended their lives quickly, but Smaug derives pleasure from the look of hopelessness and despair of his victims. At the end, Smaug's pride becomes his downfall, as the reveling in his victory gave Bard the chance to notice the bare spot in his armor, a fatal weakness comparable to the exhaust port of the Death Star. Ironically, in the midst of administrating death, an identity that he labels himself with, Smaug brought about his own demise. Like most characters consumed with pride, Smaug never saw the flaw in himself until his life was suddenly cut short. Sometimes the mighty can fall in an instant, and when they do, great is their fall. Although his time on screen was relatively short, Smaug remains one of the better antagonists in the trilogy, although that is not saying much. So what do you think of Smaug from the Hobbit trilogy, folks? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and take care.